Hello, Commissioner Esposito. We have both Commissioner Sally and Commissioner Lawson on. So whenever you're ready to start, can you hear us, Commissioner Esposito? Commissioner Esposito. There we go. Can you hear me now? I'm getting feedback. I apologize. Commissioner Esposito, whenever you're ready to begin, we have both Commissioner Sally and Commissioner Lawson on.
Are we still, can Commissioner Esposito hear us just yet?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep, now I can hear you now. Dr. Judkins, can you hear me?
You can hear me.
Dr. Judkins, can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner Sally, I can hear you as well.
Okay, I'm here, definitely. So I stand by.
And Commissioner Esposito, we could hear you as well. So whenever you're ready to start, I think. Commissioner Sally, would you be able to start the meeting for us? And then when Commissioner Esposito's sound is working, she can jump back in.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I apologize, I'm not on camera just yet, but why don't I just go ahead and open up and welcome everybody to the December 19th policy meeting. I appreciate, we have Commissioner Lawson, right, here as well? We don't have to do a formal opening, right? Because this is.
We have Commissioner Lawson as well. So it's the three of you, I believe, right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. And I'm just getting my board doc set up. All right. Oh, wait, and just one moment. I'm just getting an email from Commissioner Esposito. Okay. Commissioner Esposito is just letting me know, Dr. Judkins, to let you know that she has some technical issues with Teams. So it just says right now she can't gain or obtain access to the network. So just one moment.
And try to work with her if you'd like to get us started.
Okay. Just one moment, please. All right. We are gonna dive right in with policy ICA for school calendar. So I want to turn it over to staff for a presentation on 2.01 for ICA calendar.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Just going to pull this up. Okay, good afternoon. Could someone please confirm that they can see my screen with the opening slide?
I can. Yep. It looks
Okay,
really good.
thank you so much. My name is Rachel Pfeiffer. I'm the Executive Director of Academics, and I'm here with two policies today. The first is ICA, which relates to our school calendar. As we look at our board priorities, the calendar policy connects with priority 1. The calendar sets the framework for our instructional time, and policy or priority, 7, as we continue to work toward equity in our policies, practices, and procedures. So this policy is our framework for our district calendar decisions. It involves, it details how the school calendar is created, the number of school days and holidays, inclement weather days, and how we would go about changing the number of school days if we desired, and what we need to do in relation to the state. Excuse me.
Rachel?
Yes.
Sorry, it's Jonathan. I'm sorry to interrupt you. The slides don't appear to be advancing.
Okay. Let me stop and reshare, and hopefully that will help.
And if you need me to, I can also pull up the presentation and drive it.
Okay. Let me try one more time, and if it happens again, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind switching out, that'd be great.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I think this was an issue I had before. Okay, are you able to see what is policy ICA?
Yes.
Now we can.
Okay, sounds good. If it doesn't move to the next one, please let me know. So it's important to note that this policy is not our proposed calendar for the coming school year. That will come to the board, and we certainly annually have quite a bit of discussion about that. But this policy is really the framework that allows us to move that academic calendar process forward. Okay, can you see the slide that says purpose of revisions?
Yep.
We can.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, thanks. Okay, so the revisions that we want to make to this board policy will allow us to be aligned with Maryland law about the number of hours schools must be open for instruction. These things should be captured in our policy in a clear way in case there are ever any questions about why we are structured the way we are, and the days and months that we have for instructional time. It also incorporates a board rule, which have been used in prior years to capture what the board was doing, but not kind of official policy. We now are putting the board rule into official board policy. We also wanted to provide clarity on the components of a school calendar. Again, our policies are helpful frameworks for kind of laying out the structures that we need to use for our processes. And so you see that in this policy as well. And we also want to highlight that we value and recognize student diversity, and that we consider we are constantly in the process of putting equity at the forefront as we think through our school calendar and the various recognitions and celebrations that we have as a school district. So again, I referenced the board rule that is being incorporated here. We just want to make really clear that schools are open Monday through Friday, that they're open for at least 6.5 hours each day, and we're just codifying that in this policy. Now, specifically, proposed revisions that we are bringing forward in this policy include a section about the purpose of the calendar policy, which just allows us to be aligned with our other policies that have a clear purpose section at the beginning. I just noted the number of hours that schools are in attendance. We have 1,080 hours for elementary schools, 1,170 hours for secondary schools, and that is aligned with Maryland law and in the policy. We also want to make sure that our policies make sense together. And so with policy EBCD about delayed openings and emergency closings, we want to make sure that this policy on calendar aligns with that one. We also want to make sure that our calendar highlights that we have a spring break and a winter break. And we want to include, again, as components of our calendar, school closures, early release days for things like staff professional development, parent-teacher conferences, and other school-related purposes that tend to come up when you look at the details of the academic calendar. We also know that there have been significant changes over the past several years as we have engaged in virtual instruction in different ways, and we want to make sure we're continually aligned with the state law related to virtual instruction. Finally, I do want to highlight that our policy does recognize student diversity, and we want to make sure that we have the appropriate recognitions and celebrations during certain months or weeks. And so we've been thoughtful about that. We also want to provide more clarity through this policy on the district's approach to religious observances and days when school is open, but we know that students and families may be practicing or observing a particular holiday. And so again, we've been thoughtful about how we can be clear about what that looks like for students in those situations. And we wanted to make sure that in doing so, we're aligned with MSDE and their guidance as well. And we do want to also note through this policy that where there is summer or other programming that's taking place outside of the academic school year, that city schools will be observing Juneteenth and Independence Day. So as examples of what I referenced in the previous slide, and again, this is not an exhaustive list at all, but we did want to highlight that there are a variety of different celebrations and recognitions that we have throughout the year. Some are related to culture, some are related to, well, both people's cultural traditions and cultural backgrounds, but also culture in the sense of looking at Youth Art Month, right? School Bus Safety Week is another week that we identified. School Library Month. There are a variety of different things that we are acknowledging and celebrating as a district. And again, we've tried to be very thoughtful about how we have developed those recognitions and that attention that is given throughout the year. Again, these are just examples and not an exhaustive list. So as we bring this policy forward, this policy is Tier 1 policy, which means that we're making some smaller updates and technical changes here that align us with the state law. We will ensure that this policy is posted. It already is, but to give the public the opportunity for feedback, we will share revisions with key stakeholders, and certainly we'll be open to any questions that come from the board as we try to codify a little bit more clearly the structure and framework for our calendar. We're here at Policy Committee today. It will come to the board for first reader in February and then second reader in March. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pfeiffer. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to open it up to my fellow board colleagues, see if they have any questions this afternoon. Both Commissioner Lawson or Commissioner Esposito, if she's in town.
First, good afternoon. I do not have any questions. However, I would just like to say thank you for this work. Um, I hear from a lot of students about these things specifically, like when are we going to recognize these things on our calendar? Does our city acknowledge these things, or does our district acknowledge these things? So it's really encouraging to see that this stuff is starting to be, brought up and talked about and is important. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll just lift up what I think I heard a little bit more clearly from Commissioner Lawson is just the appreciation he's shared as he's kind of gathered some perspectives from students around the importance of this work. So I think that's what he was communicating there. So I also, Rachel, may be helpful, two things as I look at this policy is one is maybe on the recognition slide, making it very clear that recognitions don't necessarily translate into days off. So
Okay, yes.
I think that would be really helpful for the public.
Mhm.
And secondarily, this is a suggestion and a consideration, is it may be helpful for folks to know when to expect the actual, like making a distinction. I understand the difference between the policy and the actual calendar that will be available. If it makes sense to include this year when people can anticipate the school year 24-25 calendar being available, I think that may be a nice way to take the policy forward into action.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I'll go ahead and put that on that early slide where I say it's not the proposed calendar, but then I can make clear when it's coming.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Yeah, otherwise, I think it looks good to go. And we look forward to seeing it at first reader.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and Commissioner Esposito, are you there?
Yeah, I have audio on my phone and video on my computer. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, is there any way to talk about, I'm trying to think, because I know what question I would be asked, like based on communities that I've been talking to. One of the things that came up is like how does that show up as far as like what does that actually look like in the future, like if there's, like, for example, if there's a community that has holy days and varies like from school to school, like how does, I guess, like what does implementation look like? Like in school?
Absolutely. So the guidance that we have created and are kind of working through the policy, we have some days that MSDE has identified that are the days that we do not hold, for instance, testing or athletic events or after school events during those days. However, we do know that there are communities that may be celebrating something, a holy day that is not on that MSDE list. And so as we consider that, we want to make it really clear, and the way our guidance is drafted, we want families to know that their student can be absent and have an excused absence for that day, and that they will have the opportunity to make up work under both our attendance policy and our grading policy, and that they will be able to again be excused, just noting that this is a religious holiday for them. Commissioner Esposito, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, because
Okay.
that was the conversation that I had with folks, is that, like within the same community, like different groups may, celebrate like slightly different, but also like, like having, even though those holy days aren't acknowledged, they're still going to like participate in, just knowing like how to coordinate with teachers and staff on how to make up work. That's perfect.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you so much for raising that.
I think there's a question for a hand from Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, I did have one question. In board docs, where we have the PDF of the policy, is that like the final like PDF that will be presented to stakeholders, or is this just a draft for us?
That's a draft. So it's a public version that is our first effort at bringing to you our proposal for how we want to change the policy. But this policy is coming to you today, but then it will come back to the full board in February and then in March for a second conversation. And so based on those conversations, the board's input, the input we hear from various community groups, students, parents, our families who have students with disabilities, those various groups, we will revise and refine it. And then the final version, we'll present a version to the board that the board will ultimately vote on. And then that's what will go to and kind of be in our official policy section of board docs. Is that helpful?
Yes, that was. It was just that in the first sentence there was like a mistype.
Oh,
and
okay.
I didn't know. I didn't know
Yeah.
if that was. I didn't know if that was like for the public or if that was just for us.
I appreciate that. We'll go back and take a look. Thank you so much for flagging that. We will get that right before it be anything comes back to the board.
Of course, no problem.
Yeah, and typically, Commissioner Lawson too, like what will happen is like there will be several reads through. What's really important is to look at those red lines, because I think that's what we want to make sure that the language aligns with the policy that will be established. But there will be several read-throughs, not only by the office that's proposing it, but by our chief legal counsel as well, to make sure that those red lines are in accordance and alignment with the law and the policy that we're establishing, and then all the language is kind of tightened up nicely. And then the presentation, like the input that we're providing today to Ms. Pfeiffer, will help get the final draft of that presentation together. So there may be some additions on top of what we're talking about today, as Dr. Santelises and her staff make considerations as well.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pfeiffer. I'm going to kick it back to Commissioner Esposito. I was not a good acting chair today. Like, I didn't do a formal opening, so I'm going to kick it back over to Commissioner Esposito to make sure that the procedural parts of today are carried out, and then move us forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad I can connect with audio on one device. Yeah, and hopefully we get that worked out so it's not an issue in the future. Let me see. Sorry, I'm seeing some delays on my laptop. Oh yeah, so good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Policy Committee Chair Ashley Esposito. I'd like to welcome everyone to the December 19th meeting for the Policy Committee If you have not done so yet, please mute your phone, and anyone who does not mute their phone will be muted by the call moderator. Additionally, if you're not a board member, CEO, or staff, please turn off your video, and I will do a quick roll call and we'll get right to the next presentation. So, Commissioner Sally.
Present.
And Commissioner Lawson.
Present.
Thank you. And thank you. You did a great job filling in, by the way. So, okay. It looks like next we have Policy IKA Grading and Reporting. And this is a framing conversation.
That's right. You get to hear from me again. One moment and I'll get this up for you. Okay. Can you confirm that you can see Board Policy IKA?
We can. You may want to go back to slide 1 if you can.
Okay.
We see we're, I think it's like slide 5 is what's up now.
Okay. Let me.
Slightly cut off, so it might be one of those things where we have to refresh again.
Yep, let me reshare one more time. Thanks for your patience. Okay, trying one more time. Is that coming up okay?
Good now.
Okay, thank you. If it doesn't progress like it did last time, please let me know. Hopefully I'll make it clear when I should be moving slides. Again, my name is Rachel Pfeiffer. I'm the Executive Director of Academics, and I'm bringing board policy IKA and IKARA. Today, those are policy and regulations related to grading and reporting. When we look at the board priorities, we see that priorities 1, 2, and 4 really align with this particular policy we're bringing today. Looking at our instruction, looking at how we support our educators, administrators, and staff to support our students, and how we engage all stakeholders who contribute to student success. I'm on the slide that says agenda, so hopefully you can see that. And the 4 things that I'll bring before you today are the grading philosophy and some, yes.
I was just gonna say, I think it might be frozen on my end. I don't know if that's the same for everyone.
Yeah, I don't see it as well. I see
Okay.
slide.
Jonathan, would you be able to try running the slides? I'm sorry.
Yep, just let me know when you want to advance. I'll pull it up in just a second.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jonathan. We can go to the agenda slide. I think it should be the next one. I appreciate your doing that. So grading philosophy, which will include some context for you, the grading policy and what it entails, our proposed changes to the policy and some considerations as we look at making changes to our policy and regulations. Next slide. So a few principles that undergird our grading policy here at City Schools. School-based autonomy, bounded by common standards that guide excellence. It's really at the core of our grading policy. As a district, we want to clearly articulate best practices in terms of instruction and grading, and guidelines for fair and consistent grading. We also recognize that we need to have some flexibility in grading practices at the school level because there are a number of different student experiences and situations that school staff, our teachers, our school leaders are experiencing on a day-to-day basis as they are supporting our young people. And we want to give them some flexibility in being able to address those student experiences and needs. Next slide. Thanks so much. So for context, our grading policy was first codified in 2011, and there were many people clearly who were going to school here in Baltimore City prior to that time. So we had a number of longstanding practices, and what that first policy did was really to take those practices and say, this is how we're going to do things across the district moving forward. In 2019, we came back to refine some of those grading practices, and for different areas highlighted here, we increased the grading expectation for core classes from twice a month to once a week. We wanted to make sure that students were getting frequent and regular communication about how they were performing and how they were learning along the way. We increased the weight of assessments to 70%, and the intent there was that students' final grades would reflect more of what students knew and what they were able to do, and not simply the practice to build that knowledge. And when we say assessment, I want to be clear that it's not just a test. We're talking about anything that captures students' knowledge and skill in a particular area tied to the standards that they're learning. So an assessment could be giving a presentation, an assessment could be creating a project, an assessment could be doing a lab or lab report. So again, when we say assessment, I want to separate that from the idea that it's just kind of a paper and pencil or computer test. There's a broader category of things that are able to capture whether a student knows the content, and that's what we mean when we say assessment. Third, in 2019, we gave students the opportunity to reassess and earn a higher grade, and that was the first time we had put that in our actual grading policy and regulations. And we codified grade change guidelines, recognizing that there are a variety of circumstances in which there might be an error or an update needed to a student's grades. And we wanted to put the process for doing that clearly in our policy and regulations. Next slide, please. So I want to take a moment just to ground everyone in what is currently in our policy. So our policy contains the philosophy of grading, the components of a grade, school-based grading practices, specific guidance for students with disabilities and English learners, and how grading should take place in those contexts. Again, our policies are always higher level, they're frameworks. Next slide, please. When we get to our regulations, this is where we get to a little bit more of the detail. And so the regulations include information about recording grades. I mentioned the 1 grade per week, about how grades are reported, the components of a grade, assessments, classwork, participation, homework, the reassessment principle that I just mentioned, that our grades are differentiated for pre-K to 1, grades 2 to 5 and grades 6 to 12. Grade change guidelines and request forms I just mentioned, noting that they're both for grade changing within the marking period and outside of the marking period. The connection between attendance and grading, and to be clear, at city schools, attendance is not part of the grade calculation. You see the grading components up above. In some districts, attendance counts as part of your grade. We do not do that here. So when I'm talking about attendance and grading, I'm really talking about the time that a student has in order to make up work. Numeric and letter grade equivalents, right? So a 94 is an A, and that grades are rounded to the nearest percentage point. And again, more details on grading for students with disabilities and English learners. Next slide, please. So our district has had a grading work group that has met with a variety with different frequency since 2018, and this grading work group was convened to inform that 2019 grading policy change. And since that time, with the various offices and school-based staff members you see here, has continued to meet to inform a variety of different grading changes and updates that needed to be made. And it really has been important to have a cross-functional team that is weighing in on a variety of different decisions, including hearing the voices of school-based staff. Next slide. Among some of the adjustments that we have made in recent years, we adjusted our guidance so that no single staff person was responsible for grading, entry, or review in a way that would allow them to both put in and change grades, but there's a team effort that's involved in that. all grade reporters, and we have grade reporters at every school, which is part of that no single staff person bullet above, must be a certified instructional employee. We clarified our rounding processes just to make sure we were all on the same page. So, 0.5 and above rounds up to and 0.4 and below rounds down. We have used our district ticketing platform for customer service to be able to implement and track historical grade changes. So just a clear process for how that needs to happen. And we have improved the training for staff during the summer and offered some asynchronous options as well on grading. Next slide, please. Due to a variety of changes in state regulations and other district policies, we made a few changes to the grading regulation in October 2023, and I came before this group during that time to answer any questions about those changes, including the state law that now requires that students take an end of course exam that will count for 20% of a student's final grade. That is being implemented this year for our first time ninth graders that in the subject areas of biology, is the life science test, and American government. And so that is new for us this year. The students will take that, students enrolled in those classes will take that exam in January. We also wanted to make sure that we were aligned with our attendance regulations. And so ensuring that students have a reasonable amount of time to complete work that they may have missed when they were absent. And then making it a little bit clear that when a student takes a reassessment and they earn a higher grade, that they receive the higher grade in the grade book. We don't have to average it, they can receive that higher grade. Next slide, please. So looking at what we are proposing to revise in this round of our policy, we want to continue to update our policy with best practices, and that we will always come to you as we consider better ways to do things and ways that are being used effectively in other districts. We want to bring that into our policy. We want to continue to provide our schools with clear guidance for student situations that aren't one-offs, but are experienced across different schools and a greater number of students. And we do want to reaffirm school autonomy, but be very clear about what the common standards are across the district. Next slide, please. So first, among our proposed changes, we want to update our policy with best practices. And so want the board to be aware that we're engaging in an external grading performance review. We kicked that off in November, and we will work on that through February. This performance review involves a sampling of our grade changes that have taken place in the 22-23 school year, and just to see what patterns exist there, what we can learn from that can help us strengthen our grade changing process. We want to continue to review our grading policies and practices through this, and to have a template that we can use internally for the annual grade change audits that MSDE requires. We want to get some external input that would help us really strengthen that work and just really allow us to benchmark our practices with best practices happening across the nation, as I referenced earlier. So ongoing improvement taking place in our grading. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned these frequently encountered circumstances. And so part of what we have recognized is that we want to create a grading practices manual that can just be a repository of the various things that we know schools need to have easy access to in order to get guidance for various grading questions that come up. And so we are putting that together and we'll have that ready for the coming school year so that there's just an easier way to access answers when needed. We also want to make sure that our exam guidance, our GPA, grade point average weights, the guidance on grade changes, and our reassessment guidance is all updated and clear for school staff to use. And this is just, again, an ongoing process of making sure that we are aligned as we make various changes across the years. And then we know that we want to continue to develop really robust grading training. And we have found that having asynchronous opportunities in addition to in-person opportunities can be very useful. Next slide. And then again, to think about these common standards that bound school autonomy, we want, currently schools are able to submit their own school-based grading policy that we review as a district. Their assessment, their grading components cannot have assessment as less than 70%. But there are some other changes that some schools have wanted to make. And again, we review that centrally. We just want to be very clear about what that review process is, clear expectations for schools. If schools do not submit a school-specific policy that is reviewed and approved by us by July 1st, they will then default to the district policy so that we can be very clear with students and families what the expectation is and that they don't feel like there are any changes, midway through the year, the grading process. And we are working with our Office of New Initiatives to make sure that we are aligned on grading both in the charter policy and in this grading policy. Next slide, please. So it is incredibly important that we engage our community well when we are talking about grading. And we want to be clear that we are not proposing kind of a wholesale overhaul of our grading policy in this process, but we do want to continue to hear what people have to say, where there are challenges, where there's not clarity, where we can continue to improve. And so that will involve our engaging our teachers and school leaders in ongoing opportunities for them to give feedback, as well as our families and our students, to ensure that we're hearing their perspectives as well. We know that using virtual platforms has allowed us to reach more families than sometimes we've been able to do in person in the past. And we want to be thoughtful about that, as well as being thoughtful about how we hear from a variety of different students. And so while you see a variety of different groups, student groups enumerated here, what we also want to do is to use those groups to go to their school communities to elicit more voices from their peers there to be able to give us the broadest reach possible. Next slide, please. Thanks so much. So this is a framing conversation. It will come back to the policy committee in February with more details. Surely looking forward to sharing some of what we've learned from our external grading performance review during that presentation. And then it will come to the first reader of the board in April and the second reader in May, which gives us a good amount of time for a lot of community engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry, wrong audio. My bad. Yeah, so I'll open it for questions.
I may kick it off with questions and comments. Like this, I really am excited that you guys are continuing to refine this. I remember last year when we talked about grading policy. A couple things come to mind for me. One, I was just thinking, if a school does propose a grading change, are they required to solicit feedback and input from their particular or respective school communities?
We have not currently codified that as practice, and so I don't know that that is a regular occurrence, but I am so glad you mentioned it and jotting it down now as a potential part of our process as we make that process clear.
And the reason why I think that may be important is given that like a lot of our scholars, not a lot, let me just reframe that. Given that we may have scholars that change schools throughout the school year or even at the conclusion of a school year, that kind of stark change from one school community to the next, maybe just something that needs to be considered. And so just maybe a recommendation there to make sure that like schools are also soliciting input from families and other interest holders to make sure that we're thinking about like how that may impact our scholars.
Thank you.
And then secondarily, is this policy, have you guys, or are you planning to run this through teaching and learning as well? Like for feedback and input, given that that particular committee, I understand like why it's coming here for policy, but like given their relation on that side with academics in your world, it may be helpful to consider also dually, like given that we have a long timeline here, to gather specific input from that committee. Is that?
Thank you. We had not, that was not part of the current timeline, but I will definitely take that back, Commissioner Sally.
Okay, yeah, for consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Third, because this is such a robust policy, it may make sense where there are terms, just so that the board and the public, when we have a first reader, understand some of the terminology that's being used, that may just help to provide clarity. So for example, like when we're talking about, what was like a good term that came to my mind, around, like what do we mean by external review, like for example, or who's qualified to be that instructional, the grade inputter. I'm sorry, I can't remember the term that you had that for specifically for that, but like where it makes sense to like actually have those terms spelled out, I think it'll provide like alignment.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And then as we approach first reader, I think this is a policy that could benefit from having somebody who is close to the ground, like whether that's like an instructional coach at a school or a teacher themselves talk about how they see this policy being implemented, what's been helpful, challenging, or other perspectives. I think just that, since we're having a framing conversation now, I think being able to like have a practitioner share would be really beneficial for our entire community.
That's great. Thank you.
And those are my comments.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sally.
Hi, so I do have questions. Okay. So I know you kind of talked about this a little bit, but I was wondering if you can go a little bit more into detail about what does school-based autonomy mean when it comes to like grade changes and like kind of going away. Well, I don't know if that's the right term, but like going away from the district's guidelines.
Yes, thank you for that question. So we have seen schools, for instance, that might say they want assessments to count as 75% of a student's final grade rather than 70%, which is the district standard. We might have a school that says that actually they require that every student receive 2 grades per week, or there are particular assessments that every student has to take based on the way that the school is set up. For instance, you know, at City College, they're using the International Baccalaureate instructional model, and through that they have different kinds of assessments that they're using that every student takes and they weight things a little bit differently. So those are the kinds of changes that we tend to see. I think our intent by highlighting that schools do have to have these policies reviewed and that we want to be clear about the process is to say, here are the things that can be changed, here are the things that can't be changed, to just make it a little bit clear where the autonomy is and where it is not. Commissioner Lawson, I hope that answered your question, but I'm happy to say more.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think just to kind of piggyback on that, I think why that's an important thing. You know, I know some of that will come out in the training that's going to be administered to staff at the school level. I think given there has been just in the past some conversations in the media and the public around city schools kind of grading policies and things we may see at particular campuses, like just want to make sure that like we're doing our due diligence to ensure that like nobody's calling into question the high standards that we have for our students and scholars in the system. So I think, you know, just kind of leaning into like that training is going to be an important component of implementing the policy, but also like where there's kind of this notion of variances in schools that are asking for changes based upon particular needs.
Thank you for that.
Or autonomy, I guess that's the right word.
And one more question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm on two screens.
I just wanted to make sure, for clarity, so the 75% assessments that like are weighted throughout the student grade, that's set by MSDE, correct? Or is
No,
that a district?
The 70% weight for assessments was set by the district in the 2019 policy shift. Before that, every school was able to set their own grading component weights. So they could make homework as much as they wanted, or classwork as much as they wanted, or assessments as much as they wanted. And then in 2019, as a district, we said that assessments needed to count for 70%.
Okay.
And I think that's where teaching and learning can be really good help, and like kind of specifically on that point that Commissioner Lawson raised right there is like getting their input on the things that you guys are considering, like what goes into that consideration. Does the district need to, as you guys are working on that on the management side, like consider other areas that we may want to change or lean into higher, lower percentages?
Yes, absolutely.
And the feedback that I have, I know the one slide said the feedback loop would allow teachers and school leaders to provide feedback on the implementation, but you had mentioned that families would too. So I wonder if, like for the sake of transparency, like where would that feedback live? And if there's like, I don't know if it's our website or if it's, during like budget conversations with families or what it is, but to tell families that they can provide feedback on that experience. And then to follow up with that, those frequent circumstances and the examples that you explained, like maybe having that public and accessible to families so that they can actually like see an example of like what this actually looks like. So it's not like left up to interpretation.
Thank you. I will definitely bring more detail to the next time I present to the board, so we can be clear about how families engage and what they can expect to see, so that they're clear on how things are being done.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. That's all for me. Does anyone else have any questions?
That's it. I'm laying.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Looks like up next we have policy DJA, Procurement Authority.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So can I go ahead and get started?
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shabray Matthews. I'm the Director of Procurement, and today I'm presenting proposed updates to Board Policy DGA and Administrative Regulation DGA-RA. So Jonathan, you can move to the next slide. Thank you. Oop. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. The revisions to DGA and DGA-RA are aligned to Board Strategic Priorities number 3 and number 5. Procurement's policy and regulations allow us to support the district's effort to maintain high quality resources and ensure the success of students, staff, and community. Next slide. The purpose of the revision. So one of Governor Westmore's first procurement actions as governor was to increase the small procurement threshold for the entire state of Maryland. So under a new Maryland law, HB 543, effective October 1st, 2023, the small procurement threshold for the state of Maryland was increased from $50,000 to $100,000. The last threshold increase for the district was back in 2019, when it was increased from $25,000 to the current $50,000 threshold. Incorporation of board rules. So we are taking the opportunity, as promised to the board, to incorporate a couple of board rules into our administrative regulations, specifically 302.02 reports, records, and publications for purchase orders, and Rule 1003, the right to organize. So just an update on those two board rules. Next slide. So what do the proposed revisions provide? The proposed revisions will help to streamline the procurement process by providing us with more flexibility to process procurements from $50,000 to $100,000 without having to seek board approval or releasing time-consuming solicitations. This will enable us to complete purchases and projects faster. It will save lots of time and will allow us to focus our time and resources to manage larger scale procurements. So this is a good change, as seen by the state as well. It will help our team, offices, departments, increase productivity and help the schools and the students get their requested items and services much faster. The provision is also good for small businesses and allows them more contract capacity to do business. And it's important to note that increasing the limit does not exempt us from seeking competition for small procurement purchases. It's just going to simply allow us to expedite the procurement process. Next slide. So some of the revisions that we will need to make to our administrative regulation DGA include updating all references to the small procurement threshold to reflect $100,000, along with some other conforming changes and provision adjustments that we'll get into in the upcoming slides. Next slide, and you can skip this one also. Thank you. Okay, so we currently have our small procurements broken out into 2 categories. Category 1 represents procurements up to $10,000 and require 1 quote to be attached to the requisition. Category 2 represents procurements greater than $10,000 but up to $50,000, and anything over $50,000 requires a competitive solicitation and board approval. Under the new threshold, we have changed the threshold amounts for category 1 and 2. Category 1 will now represent procurements up to $25,000, and will require 1 quote. Category 2 now represents procurements greater than $25,000 up to $50,000 and will require 2 quotes. And then the new category 3 represents procurements greater than $50,000 up to $100,000 and requires the end user to obtain 3 quotes. Anything over $100,000 will require competitive bidding and board approval. Next slide. So again, with the approval to increase the threshold, all procurements over $100,000 will require board approval. Next slide. Thank you. With the threshold change will come some adjustments to the contract review and approval process. Contracts over $100,000 will require the review of the project monitor, and the respective chief will be reviewed and signed by the chief legal officer or his designee for legal sufficiency, and reviewed and signed by the director of procurement, and approved and signed by the CEO. Next slide. For procurements $100,000 or less, the purchase order terms and conditions will serve as the contract. Some procurements under $100,000 may require a fully executed contract depending on the scope of services. In this case, the contract must also be reviewed and approved by the project monitor and the respective chief, requires legal to sign off for legal sufficiency, requires the signature of the director, but under this category, the CEO is exempt from signing at this level. Also to note, there are times when another form of agreement may be used for procurements, such as data sharing or digital tools or other appropriate goods or services as determined by the director of procurement or the chief legal officer. Next slide. Thank you. MOUs or memoranda of understanding have a similar process to contracts. So they also require the review of the project monitor and the chief, reviewed by the chief legal officer for legal sufficiency, signed by the director of procurement, and approved and signed by either the CEO or the chief of staff. Next slide. So the impact on the MWBE program, procurements over $100,000 will require MBE compliance. However, at the discretion of the director of procurement and the chief legal officer, we can refer procurements valued less than $100,000 to the MBE department to assess and apply MBE goals where appropriate. Next slide. So due to market conditions and the impacts related to the material supply chain and labor markets, there are 2 construction-related adjustments that we are proposing in the upcoming slide. In order to address the increased construction costs, we are proposing to permanently increase the on-call construction threshold from $500,000 to $1.5 million, and the A&E program managers and construction managers threshold from $200,000 to $500,000. Next slide. There is a new definition for online, for our new AMP system. We updated the language related to ERP systems to include Oracle Fusion, and also listed some generic language that will cover new or replacement systems for future use. Next slide, thank you. So some other proposed revisions include, we have a bunch of bullets here, so bear with me. Clarifying that City Schools is not responsible for issues related to electronic bid submissions. We have moved strictly to receiving bids electronically, and this provision provides an extra layer of protection related to technical issues. For the next bullet, there are no substantial changes to the section related to debarment, but we did take this opportunity to beef up the language related to the 3-year term and the board's approval for anything over 3 years. Next bullet, the same with cooperative purchasing agreements, also known as piggyback contracts. We updated the language to mirror the language in COMAR. The director has to determine that the piggyback provides a cost benefit to the district, provides efficiencies, and is not used to evade our policies and regulations. The next proposed revision is really related to unauthorized purchases. They are considered void unless approved in writing by the Director of Procurement or the CFO. Our approval of the purchase order serves as the approval in writing. And last but not least, this proposed revision cites that vendors cannot create multiple businesses, structures, or identities to avoid the requirements of our administrative regulations. Next slide. For stakeholder engagement, we will post these proposed revisions on the website for public feedback and share them with the below key stakeholders for written feedback. Regarding the timeline, so this request will go to the January 23rd board meeting for first reader and February 13th for second reader. If approved at second reader, the policy and administrative regulations shall become effective at 12:01 a.m. on February 14th, 2024. And I will open it up for questions, comments, and feedback.
Thank you. Guess I'll check with my colleagues to see if anyone has any questions.
I can weigh in. So I guess the first question I have, has this gone to the operations committee for review?
It has not.
Okay, given the technical nature of procurement and given the operations committee's like heavy involvement engagement, I think it would be really important to have this go through operations as well. Just given that there are just things that I just want to make sure that folks who have a little bit more familiarity with this have an opportunity to weigh in.
Commissioner Sally, this is Josh Sivan, Chief Legal Officer. So appreciate your thoughts on this one, and I know on the prior one for grading. Typically, we don't send regulations to multiple policies, to multiple committees for review.
Okay.
We rely on the commissioners, to commissioners to gather feedback from others. We take feedback in first reader. So, and we could change it, but I think that one of the challenges is just working on our timelines for all of this to make sure that things are ready for work or school. But I'd be happy to discuss with you and Ms. Matthews and others like an appropriate way to get all their feedback, because we want as much feedback as we can.
Okay. If that doesn't go to operations, I think we can anticipate a significant number of questions in first reader regarding some of these, what we see here today. So just a cautionary note.
Definitely.
And secondarily, along with this policy here, or these regulations and changes here, it would be helpful also to have a glossary here, because there are terms, I am not a procurement specialist, but there are terminology used here that carry significant meaning. I know some of these are spelled out when I read through the red lines, but for example, I know we've used an abbreviation, the NWBE, Minority Women Business. We want to make sure we spell things out that do provide clarity for us. But a glossary would be super, super, super helpful.
Okay.
And then the third question I had, this is not, and I especially like not for today, but maybe a follow-up question that you could answer for me. It's just helping me have an understanding of like how this will, I understand some of these changes, how this will really impact city schools business with outside vendors, but it would be helpful to know, this is why I was thinking this should go to operations, is like, what can we anticipate as big shifts? Like, do we see a lot changing this year once this policy goes into effect in February? A little, like, it would just be helpful to get a sense from you, from the normal cadence of what procurement is, what we can anticipate as kind of big changes.
Okay.
I think that's a follow-up question, because that's a lot to go into today. And where this is a consideration is where it may be helpful to summarize in like a chart, given there are like how you did like kind of what was in the current category of changes from 10 and 1050 to what can be new. It may be helpful in slide 10, 11, 12, to really summarize like in a chart format so that our interest holders can really understand what's being changed, who is the signator, XYZ. So
Okay.
that's maybe just helpful at a glance to provide more transparency.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
If I can just piggyback off on that, because I think we're definitely like on the same page, Commissioner Sally. I think it would be helpful to see, because you mentioned that the references where it mentions small procurements would change. I think it would be helpful to see where those references exist. Like, do they exist in other policies, or like what is the impact on other things? And also, what percentage of the requests would be impacted by this change? And how much of our budget would be impacted by the change? Like, I don't know if that's like a percentage or, yeah. And
Ms.
then,
Matthews, you want to start? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Esposito.
oh, just the last one was, as far as like the technical problems with the electronic submission, is there an alternate or an alternative submission source? Like, I know you all are saying that City Schools is not responsible for technical issues, but if an issue arises, is there an alternative way to capture the submission that's coming through? Because like, even like the way this meeting started out, we had some like technical issues, but we're like making it work. Like, is there like a plan B?
Understood. Okay. I'm sorry, Chief Seven, what were you saying?
Oh, I was happy to chime in on some of these, but why don't you take it away first?
Okay, so I'll start with the electronic. So we are required to post all solicitations in eMaryland Marketplace. We're required by the state. One of the suggestions by the auditor is that if we are receiving bids and proposals through our own internal email system, it proposes challenges. So we moved to using to fully using the eMaryland Marketplace electronic bid submission software. So Plan B, they have a pretty good hold on it. Plan B for us we would have to go back to receiving it directly here in the building, which we definitely don't want to do. We want to keep the submissions electronic because it just streamlines the process a lot more. Plan B would be for us to receive them directly here at the district office if something goes wrong, which we can do, but because we've done that for a very long time.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and then I have the note to include the percentage of requests, and then to check on how much of our budget will be impacted.
And if I might chime in on that, Ms. Matthews, because two things. First, Commissioner Esposito, to your question about where we change the threshold. So if we look in the red line, and if you'd like, we can bring that up. We noted each time that we changed that threshold and what the references were. So I think those are framed out in the red line. I think also it's what we've seen happening, and Ms. Matthews can chime in. What we've seen happening is with costs and inflation going up, what used to be a small procurement under $50,000 is now a procurement under $100,000. So in essence, we over the long term, like if you compared what's happening now to what was happening 5 years ago, I think you'd see a pretty much consistency in terms of the 50 to 100. What we've seen recently happening is a lot more things that historically had been under $50,000 were now creeping up into the 50 or 100. So, and that was having dramatic impact in slowing down the procurement process, the legal review process, and really the provision of services to our students. So we think this will get us back into operation. We also added in a provision to clearly say that we would report to the board on an annual basis. What is the spend and at what level? So that's a way that we'll be able to track this going forward. But I think it may be challenging to get a good picture with our current data, because what we're really trying to do is to change and streamline the process going forward.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Lawson, do you have any questions?
I do not.
And I definitely do agree with Commissioner Sally that it would be helpful to hear from folks on the operation committee in advance, because I do know that there's some folks that know a lot about procurement. So yeah, I don't know. So I guess we can make sure that they receive this information, have the ability to provide feedback or ask questions asynchronously. Does that work?
We can work on that offline. I did have one other response to the question about having a glossary of terms. In the policy itself, there's an extensive list of definitions, and one thing we try to balance is not to have too many slides in it, but would appreciate feedback on what's the balance between those copious definitions that are in the policy and regulation themselves versus the slides, which we want to keep streamlined. Would welcome thoughts about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's right. I think where we have terms, this is where I struggle a little bit with this policy, just because it is very technical in nature. It is really important to like our fiduciary responsibility. It's really important to be really good stewards of like, you know, the money and their expenditures and outlays. And so this policy, I think, where we feel like there are terms that may lend itself to greater transparency, I think is highlighting and lifting some of those up, but also leaning into that. And to your very good point, Chief Simmons, is just saying to the public, like, this is not an extensive list, but there's a couple of key terms that we want to point out that are used in today's presentation more than once, or that are really important, like for folks to really understand, like what and why we're here in front of the board today. So, but there are areas where to your point about like kind of the balance between the number of slides, that I think, going back to my earlier comment, could be summarized in a way, like either in a chart format that can help really clarify in my mind when I'm looking at it, is like, what is this, you know, who is the one who's signing off on this, and X, Y, and Z. And so like, that could help to slim some of those down in a couple of areas, but that's for consideration.
Noted.
Yeah, and I think that's a good compromise, that if there's terms that are used in the presentation for, you know, the public, to have a slide that captures those ones like in advance, like rather than like going to like the whole policy and breaking down every single term, the ones that do that are included in the slides, it would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, comments?
And the reason why I do pick a little bit on that glossary thing is because I think quite often, like, the public is not always going to go through the regulation or the policy changes in detail. And so even at a quick glance, like, to anchor them, like in some of those terms, like not having to go over them in the presentation, but anchoring them in those key terms, but reminding them to go back to the actual written policy is totally fine. But I think it does just kind of move our stakeholders in that direction. That's why I'm kind of pushing on that a little bit. Thank you guys for the consideration.
Very welcome. Thank you. So are there any other questions or comments?
None from me.
All right. Thank you for your
Nothing else
time. Okay.
Thank
Thank you. All right. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Commissioner Esposito, are you able to move us through the compliance reports, or do you need me to take over for a minute?
Yeah, can you help me? Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
great.
absolutely, no problem.
Yeah, I'm working with
Let's.
the screen. It's confusing.
It's all right. It's okay. I can help pitch it here. So policy JFA, looking at residency, non-residency tuition. Are there any questions from my board colleagues regarding what was contained in this particular compliance report?
Not at this time.
One quick question I had just for staff is I noticed that there's a downward trend in the number of non-resident tuition. Do you have any information on what you think that's attributed to? Not that that's a significant thing.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. What I will say about that is we see kind of the downward trend really take into effect after the change of our tuition amounts, and then also after COVID. Since COVID, we've kind of held steady in kind of the 25 to 30 range for the past couple of years following COVID. For this particular year, we have a kind of a year-over-year increase of just one particular student. So it went from 30 the previous year to 31 for last school year. And just one flag, this data reports out on 22-23, not 23-24.
Got it. Thank you so much. That's helpful. I think that's it on this compliance report. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good evening. Let's look at JFBC, informal kinship care. Are there any questions from my board colleagues on this particular compliance report?
Not this time.
Okay, and we can skip through that one. All right, let's look at JFC, interdistrict student transfer. Are there any questions from my colleagues on that?
Not at this time. I don't have any questions.
I just want to thank the staff for a very thorough read through. I think the information here is really important and very helpful. Mr. Tillman, is this one yours as well?
Yes, guilty. This is my my poor presentation to the board today.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. Look at this. Look at this. No, I think this is really, really helpful. I think it gives the board really robust information. This is something I'm going to encourage my other board colleagues to look at. Gives us a lot of information in terms of like what's happening to our students and where they're going and what's going on in the district. So I appreciate the work that you guys have done. I know it's no easy feat to like collect this data. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that compliment and your support.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's look at withdrawals and reentry. Any questions for my board colleagues on withdrawals and with reentries? And my understanding is
not at this time. Oh, sorry, not at this time, but I think I will follow up in an email. Not at this time, but I think I'll follow up in an email about one small question, but not right now.
I think we'll leave it there, Ms. Barnes. That's okay with you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, let's look at KIB, which is Sex Offender Registry. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
I do have a question for the last compliance report, but I'm gonna send it through email because it's a lot of
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, so we'll close out with Ms. Barnes on that one, but like, let's look at ethics on policy BCA. And Ms. Barnes, is that one yours as well?
Policy B, no.
Okay, all right. Code of ethics, compliance report. I don't have any questions on this in particular. Hi, Tanisha, how you doing? I know this is an area that Tanisha looks at in particular. I guess, because we don't have a lot of trend over data here, like, can you summarize at a high level what you believe, like, kind of are trends in BCA?
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, I think at this point, everyone. The Code of Ethics, and Dr. Judkins, if you're here, I don't want to, let me know if you want to chime in. But the Code of Ethics, this compliance report just gives the numbers overall year to year of our compliance reports, those that are submitted via financial disclosure statements and conflict of interest trainings for the district.
Got it. Pretty clean report. I think that's it. And Commissioner Esposito will follow up with a question on this one in particular. Thank you so much. All right, we're running just a little bit behind this evening, but we want to move to public comment. Dr. Judkins, did we receive any public comment this evening before we move to authorized group?
No, we didn't.
None?
We are good.
None? All right. And do we have any authorized groups that wanted to speak this evening that may be on the line? I don't think there's any. All right. So with that, I want to ask Commissioner Esposito, do you want to take it over and close us out?
Sure. Yeah. So our next meeting will be January 16th from 4 to 5:30 virtual. The agenda items are going to be ADF, wellness, nutrition, physical activity policy, compliance reports from for JBA, JBB, JICK, and JBEBB. And of course, as always, you can sign up for public comment at 9 a.m. the Thursday before the meeting until 5 p.m. the Monday right before the meeting date. And so individuals and groups interested in providing public comment can sign up by contacting our board office at 443-642-4095. You can visit the board office, or you can email the board office at schoolboard@bcps.k12.md.us. We have spots for 5 individuals to provide public comment to the policy committee. And we just ask that the issues that you're raising are related to what we'll be reviewing. Everyone gets 3 minutes to speak. And unfortunately, signups aren't permitted the day of the meeting. But if you guys have any questions or want to see a full calendar of what's coming up, you can go to the BaltimoreCitySchools.org website and look under the policy section. Thank you all.
And before we adjourn, I just want to thank everybody for your engagement, really robust engagement this past year, and I hope that everybody has some well-deserved time off over the holiday season, and look forward to re-engaging in the new year with everybody.
Oh yeah, this is our last meeting of the year, so congratulations and thank you, everyone.
Thanks City School staff for all your hard work and supporting our scholars. So I'll see y'all in the new year. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.